The water pushes the gold and other sediments into a series of wooden boxes. And because gold is 6 times heavier than rock, it sinks to the bottom. The miners then sifted through the stones and silt by panning. It takes an incredibly long time. One can only imagine how much work the miners had to do to pay off the expense of coming here, send money home, and save up so they can go back. It took years, and when the poll tax increased from £10 to 100, it took even longer.
And that was why you see some of these miners coming back again and again. You know, they came as young men, and then because they were exempt from paying the poll tax, if they came back, they were the ones that the family sent back again. And so you see some miners are back 3 or 4 times, and obviously getting older and older each time. And maybe they are some of the miners that ended up becoming old men on the West Coast.
One of them was an elderly fellow called Kai with one eye.
He was a very popular Chinese miner, lived in this just near Shantytown. He had been injured in a mining accident and he only had one eye. And I guess like some of the other old Chinese that ended up here, he may have not had a good claim. Maybe he was unlucky. He didn't manage to save much money. And as they became, and once they got over 65 or 70, they were quite limited in the kind of mining they could do, and it really became a matter of eking out an existence.
Nobody knows what became of Kai, but Julia hopes he was able to get back home. It's a belief held by the Chinese back then that a deceased person's remains should be buried in his own land, else he becomes a restless, wandering spirit.
The Chinese were very good at contributing money to help each other get back home, and sometimes in later years the Europeans would contribute to them as well. They actually understood how important it was for the Chinese to get home.
For others, New Zealand was the last stop. As the gold rush slowly died down, most Chinese in the West Coast turned to other professions. There were market gardeners, cooks, and fruiterers. This was less of a gamble, and those who did well were able to bring their families here. Young He was 13 when his father sent for him in 1882. He could barely speak a word of English, but 1 year later was already winning awards in school.
And young He went on to become a law clerk for one of the Greymouth law firms, and was incredibly important to the Greymouth Chinese because not only could he negotiate and move between European and Chinese society, but he was able to advise on any court procedures. He could act as their agent on all sorts of matters, and he was very involved in the anti-opium movement and instigated this anti-opium petition that was signed by a lot of Chinese on the West Coast, and he was the driving force behind the Anti-Opium Act. The Anti-Opium Petition and the Anti-Opium Act were very well meant, but the way that the police used the Anti-Opium Act to harass the Chinese meant that it actually didn't really work very well in their favour. He did what was then seen as an unforgivable thing, and he married a European woman who he already had a Chinese wife here in Greymouth with him, and when he left to shift to Hong Kong, a young Greymouth woman left and went to Hong Kong and married him there as well. And once it became known he'd married May Ford, he is just not mentioned, and of course she is never mentioned again.
The number of Chinese in the West Coast fluctuated over time. Eventually all were to head home or move to the bigger cities. But in Reefton, a fruiterer's family stayed put. They were to become the last Chinese family to be living on the coast. Jimmy Jan had the only fruit shop in Reefton. The building is now a gallery and artist's studio, but the original structure is still there, and so are the memories, some bittersweet.
There weren't that many Chinese people that lived on the coast and standing out because there weren't any Asians or Maoris on the coast, so you would only have one brown-skinned person. That was our family, basically.
Okay, was it difficult?
Difficult, yes, until I was about 10 or 11 and getting into sports and having the friendships from what sports provide and being good at sports helped, and representing your district, which was West Coast, Bulla. in rugby and in athletics, which helped.
When Peter and his brother finished high school, the family left in 1978 for Wellington, where the Chinese community was bigger.
The whole town had a big gathering at the community centre, and yeah, a big farewell. There were hundreds of people, virtually the whole town were there to see him off and wish him farewell, which was amazing.
Although the family didn't know it, their send-off was fitting, for it signaled the end of the line for Chinese settlement in the West Coast. The Chinese who traveled those 100 years might be long gone, but their stories have now been preserved, a testament to the forgotten, now an indelible part of New Zealand and its history.